The views and opinions expressed in the following program are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect those of KSMQ Public Service Media Incorporated or its assigns.
Welcome to the Heart of the Matter. I'm your host, Stephanie Passingham. Home is where the heart is, and our homes have been making headlines ever since the real estate bubble burst. National headlines scream of foreclosures, underwater mortgages, and homelessness. But what is the reality here in our region? On today's program, we'll explore all aspects of the housing market. Is homeownership still worthwhile? We start by talking with John Ford from the Albert Lea Housing and Redevelopment Authority.
I would say that we're almost in a period of stagnance as far as the economy. I don't see it getting any worse, but we don't see it change a lot for the better either. And housing is a good measure of that. Household incomes, employment, things like that have dropped fairly significantly. The number of homes we have on the market now is probably comparable to, a year and a half ago. The difference we've seen is that a year and a half ago, about 70% of the homes that were on the market were occupied. Now we're seeing where about 70% are vacant. We've seen what we would consider indicators that it is a very, very tough economy. It's a tough job market, and we haven't seen it going back the other direction yet, which to me indicates we're kind of in a bottom. And hopefully we'll start working our way back up the other side. HRAs are kind of unique to Minnesota in that there's a state statute that allows you to become a housing redevelopment authority as opposed to what typically would be known as a public housing agency. Essentially, our mission is to provide affordable housing opportunities for families within our jurisdiction, and also to work on a community level as far as working towards redevelopment initiatives. And really, we kind of see ourselves as a catalyst for most housing opportunities, most housing programs and projects that will occur within our jurisdiction.
Citing all of that.
I mean, you can cite 100 different things of why housing is important. Housing, for example, for children is extremely important. Stable housing, they are better students, they're in better health, their family lives are more stable by having a stable home environment, safe and decent housing, and that's essentially what one of our primary missions is, to ensure safe and decent housing. Part of the problem with the foreclosure crisis is that we push too hard for too many people to be homeowners, and some of them simply weren't ready. And we set some folks up to fail, I think, by that. That push for homeownership for so many people opened the door for predatory lending practices. We have to offer people opportunities to become more educated about homeownership to help set them up to be successful in it.
Creating the right mix of housing, including affordable options, can be challenging, but good things are happening in our area. Coming up, I was joined by local experts who explain how housing can come in many forms. We also talk more specifically about what the housing picture looks like for our region. Well, today we're talking about housing, homeownership, renting, a whole host of topics. But let's start at the beginning with a kind of a big picture look at, Eric, what's the housing situation look like now compared to how it may have changed over the last 3 or 4 years?
Well, of course, in the middle part of the 2000s, when the rest of the country was having huge run-ups in pricing, southeastern Minnesota definitely had increases, but we were a pretty stable market. So because we didn't rise as fast as the rest of the country, we certainly haven't fallen off like the rest of the country.
Okay, but times have been a little tough. You're in the real estate business, and give us a sense of, are we moving homes? Are people buying? Are people able to sell? What's your feel out there?
People are still able to buy and sell homes. That certainly isn't a problem. It's definitely a good environment with low interest rates.
Okay.
So it is definitely a good buying opportunity because those interest rates are so low and there's a good supply of inventory.
All right. Statewide, Minnesota has about 75% home ownership rates. Umbelina, what does that look like for our part of the state? Are we similar? And with your organization, you often help folks with a number of different programs related to housing, not just ownership.
We have, when in 2005 there was a study showing about homeownership in the
white households being 77% and minorities being at 42%. So we saw that there was like a 32% difference, a gap. Okay. So that's when a chief homeownership was created or brought to the surface of bringing some more awareness of bringing homeownership to the minority communities. Okay. And so in the last 3 years, we have worked really hard to bring awareness of preparing our minorities to buy homes. And it has been really excellent. We've seen a huge interest on the Hispanic and African immigrants that are really wanting to buy homes. And so that has been a positive, but we also have seen people being feared for foreclosure, just the word foreclosure. They're scared. And they especially our minorities that never know if they're going to be able to keep their job. Even though they have a good job today, they're worried about tomorrow not having that job. So just the fear of foreclosure has stopped some of our people that are able to purchase homes.
Sometimes specific terms really do drive behavior. Eric, what have you seen in terms of, are people nervous about buying? Do you find that people are less able to qualify for loans during this time?
I certainly see a sense of normalness. 5-6 years ago, the lending practices really kind of got out of hand, where basically anybody could buy a house. So people talk today that lending guidelines are a lot more strict. I don't really think they're all that much more strict. I think they're just back to normal.
Okay. The fact that today we're seeing that our buyers are more prepared to buy a home versus, 3 or 4 years ago, we were seeing just anybody buy a home. They weren't even prepared to buy a home. And now we're seeing that our buyers are thinking about it. They're being more educating themselves about homeownership, and even if with a contract for deed, people are still educating themselves as how to get into a contract for deed and not be in 3 years homeless again.
Eric, sometimes foreclosure, while it sounds like a terrible term, what is sometimes one family's pain is another family's benefit in terms of bringing those home values back in line. Where are home values at? You talked about they didn't maybe spike the way some other parts of the country did, and so they haven't fallen as far. Are they at what you've talked about, a normal level? And is that providing opportunities along with that low interest rate for families to get into a home where they might not have otherwise?
Well, across all of southeastern Minnesota, median home prices are down approximately 2 to 3% year over year.
Okay.
I definitely see that the rural areas are getting a little bit harder hit than some of the metropolitan areas, just because of the fact the metropolitan areas is where the jobs are, and again, people have filling their gas tank on their mind. They want to be closer to, to work. They want to be closer to the schools, and so again, the broad numbers are we're down about 2 to 3%, but there are definitely pockets in southeastern Minnesota that are seeing appreciation this year.
Joey, you mentioned something when we were talking before the program began, that when folks sometimes have to leave their home, it's not always through a financial situation. You shared a story with us about kind of Mother Nature took care of some folks who then put some pressure on other areas of housing like rental, which I'd like us to talk about.
Well, we did have a flood in the Mason City area where there were 161 homes destroyed. And so the city had to do a buyout, and it was very devastating to a lot of families. In Cerro Gordo at present, we have a little over 35,000 parcels that people own. And then we also have 12,321 homeowners, that are taxpayers. We have lots of people that would like to continue to buy, but what we're seeing, because I represent the homeless population, is that there are more rentals that are peaking up. 3 years ago, there were approximately 3,100 rentals, and now there's about 4,100 rentals, and that seems to be the focus right now. There are lots of properties, homes that are for sale in the Mason City, North Iowa area, and so what we're finding is we are a small community. We have about 31,000 persons in Mason City, and And so it's our jobs, there are just not enough jobs for people to be able to purchase a lot of properties. So we're sort of at, not really a standstill, but it's not peaking up where there are homeowners, I mean, and buyers right now.
And what about that rental market? Do you see that driving up rental prices then? And is there any advice to families when they kind of take a look at, do I rent or do I buy at this time?
Well, I know that 6 to 7 years ago, in the Rochester area, for example, we were running about a 25% vacancy rate in the rental market.
Okay.
That number is probably closer to 5 to 7% now.
Wow, big
so there's
change.
definitely an increase, pressure with rentals, and that's a good thing. A balance between a portion of the population being home ownership and a portion renting is always a good thing.
But we're also seeing in Rochester, we have a lot of newcomers coming into Rochester, which are using the rental instead of purchasing, they're renting. So we're seeing a lot of newcomers coming into to the Rochester area. It's up to the Austin area, and some of the other Faribault has a lot of newcomers that have come in, and they're renting. Some of the older buildings that people weren't renting are now being used, so which is great that we had those things in place to help those families that are coming in that cannot purchase right away.
So we often think of this housing crisis as impacting homeowners and folks who can have the ability to purchase, or in this case we see there's some pressure on rent. But Joey, you are with Northern Lights Homeless Shelter. Does the economy relative to housing drive customers to your door at the shelter, or really are there other impacts that are greater when it impacts your numbers?
Well, for the homeless population, there are many factors of why a person becomes homeless. And we see a lot of this because of loss of employment, probably separation of families, and losing their home to foreclosure. And so there is no other place for them to go. We have wonderful homeless shelters. We have 5 of them, and 4 of them are for men. 1 is for disabled men. We have a large facility for women and children, which that's where we see a lot of mothers that are single mothers right now with families, and so they're coming to us. And then we work closely with Community Action and the different agencies in our area so that we can get them into homes like Habitat for Humanity. And so we work very, very hard and struggle to eliminate homelessness and having to rent. We would prefer to put them in their own home. Look in your crystal ball, folks, for me, and project into the future if you can. What best advice would you give to someone when they are looking for a place to live?
I would say definitely be prepared. There's wonderful home stretch classes out there that really dive into the the positives of home ownership, but also the pitfalls of home ownership, and that one being taking care of your home. Renting obviously is good for some people, but nobody should do it forever.
Three Rivers is also a provider for home stretch classes, and we just started in the last year and a half, but our classes are in Spanish and are in English with an interpreter to serve all the newcomers and the Hispanic population that needed to be prepared for home ownership. We were seeing that people were buying, but then in 2-3 years they were losing their homes because they weren't prepared. They weren't ready to buy a home. And the home stretch classes have been so wonderful, and there's many other agencies that teach the home stretch classes that I really advise people that if you are a first-time home buyer, it's important that you get into a class as soon as possible. Don't wait until you're really thinking about buying a home or buying the home now. Think before you actually decide that that's the house you're going to buy. We don't want the lenders to say, we want you to come on your own. But it is really important for our community to understand that some of these classes, even people that have bought a home will go to my classes and say, wow, I didn't know this. This is awesome.
So maybe folks who have already been through that process and maybe lost their home would benefit from coming to those as well.
Especially people that went through a foreclosure, that they're still scared, and their foreclosure could have been 5-7 years ago, and they're still not sure they want to buy a home. The home stretch classes are really great. We tailored them to the Spanish language. We try to make it more relaxed, so don't people feel that they're coming in and you know, we really, the classes are great. We, at the end of the day, when classes are done, we're telling people to leave because they don't want to leave.
Because they stay and visit.
Yeah.
Well, it sounds like home ownership is still part of the American dream that people are aspiring to. It sounds like there are some great many resources available in the community, and I thank you guys for coming in and sharing that with us.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you very much.
While our region has not been immune to the housing crash, we fortunately haven't experienced the extreme swings of either coast. Finding the right home for you is still within reach, and there are people to help. Judy Plank from the Rochester Olmsted Community Housing Partnership joined us to share some very specific, practical advice on how you can find the home that fits your life. Judy, thanks for being here. We have been talking about housing on today's program, and there's a distinction in the type of housing that people have. Is home ownership always the right choice for folks?
Home ownership isn't always the right choice. You really have to look at your own circumstances. If you're only going to be living in the community for a short time, renting is a better choice. If you don't have job stability, renting is a better choice. If you have some credit issues, you probably want to take care of those credit issues before you look into home ownership so you can get a very good loan.
Okay, and a good loan means?
A loan that that is going to be affordable to you, I guess the number one. The nice thing about in Minnesota, it's very hard to get a bad loan like we used to have years ago, because the state has come through with legislation to really be positive and proactive that lenders have to look at your income and look at your credit, and you have to have a decent credit score in order to get into home ownership today.
Okay, and so credit score is important, interest rate is important, down payment. What kind of, how much should people expect to have prepared for or saved for in order to get into a home?
Depending upon the programs. There are programs, if you're going to live in rural Minnesota, that you can get in with probably less than $1,500.
Wow.
Because it's called a rural development mortgage.
Okay.
There are also programs that under FHA, and you have to have about 3.5% of the sales price to be able to purchase the home. And then there's a traditional conventional mortgage where you need 5% down plus your closing costs.
Okay. You talked about conditions being right for home ownership, and you talked about living a certain length in the community. How long? So if you think you're going to live somewhere 3 years, is that a rent situation, and 10 years is a buy?
3 years is a rent situation.
Okay.
Because the investment for the down payment and your closing costs, in 3 years' time, you're not going to recoup all those closing costs. Okay. So you're better off renting. Plus, in 3 years, you're not sure what the market is going to be like to resell your home.
Sure.
10 years, you have a longer window. The chances are you're going to see some gain, equity in your home in that 10-year time period, and you recoup all those costs that you had for purchasing the home.
Okay. And how do families prepare for kind of that long-term look? It's, you know, so many of us think it's impossible to predict tomorrow, let alone 10 years from now. What's your best advice to them in terms of determining whether this is going to be a reasonable investment over the long term?
Take the homebuyer education classes.
Okay.
Homebuyer education classes are offered throughout the state of Minnesota. There is a state organization, the Homeownership Center, that has a list of all the homeownership classes in the state of Minnesota. These classes walk through the whole process of buying a home. Are you ready for homeownership, budgeting for homeownership, working with a lender, working with the realtor, doing the closing, and what happens after homeownership and the maintenance of a home. It's a fantastic class. We offer the class in Rochester. It's offered quarterly in Austin. It's offered monthly in Mankato. So it's out there for the community to look at.
Renting has become an option that has increased for families, whether it's because they lost their home through foreclosure or they're new to a community. What things should they keep in mind when they take a look at renting for their housing choice?
What they need to do is just as if you're going to be a homeowner. Can you afford the rent? look at your budget before you go out and look at rental properties. Know exactly what you can afford for monthly payments. When you're talking to landlords, make sure you find out what the utility costs are and how much do you have to pay the gas, the electric, what are your fees involved in that? And then, does that fit my budget? Just the same as home ownership.
Okay.
Because a landlord can file an unlawful detainer and have you evicted if you can't make your rent payments, just as the mortgage company can go through the foreclosure process.
Okay.
So budget is probably the key to everything that you do in life.
Okay. Is there a percentage? You know, we've heard several numbers, but what's your advice in terms of percentage of income spent on housing?
The percentage that quote, they say it's 31%.
Okay.
If you look at Section 8, they're saying 30 to 31% goes towards housing. If you go out to get a mortgage, it's 30 to 31% of your gross income.
Okay.
But again, every person lives differently. Every person has different spending styles. Some have daycare, others don't. It's really your own personal budget that should accommodate you and what you're going to be spending either for rental or for a mortgage payment.
Okay.
Not based on what the national ratio is.
All right. What are some of the most surprising things people have said to you that they didn't expect when it came to home ownership? We think of that as being the ideal world, but it's more than just the purchase price, isn't it?
Surprising things that they've called and they said, the furnace broke, who's going to fix it? And I'm saying, you're going to fix it, and well, I don't have the money. That's where we really promote in the homeownership classes that you start saving for those things that are going to happen in your home. Ideally, if you can save 1% of the sales price a year, that will give you that buffer. So when the furnace breaks, the water heater goes out, you need to put a new roof on and the insurance isn't going to cover it, you'll have money to do those things. I think maintenance is a huge part of that home ownership, that people just forget about the maintenance.
What are the various steps? You talked about preparing for home ownership and taking those home ownership classes. Are there corresponding education classes, or maybe these particular ones apply as well, to the rental process to know what you should expect, what a lease should look like?
There aren't, but the state of Minnesota, the Attorney General's office has a wonderful booklet called Landlord-Tenant Rights. And it is free on the internet, or you can call the Attorney General's office and they'll mail it to you for no cost. This is an excellent resource for anyone that's going to be renting. It tells you what you as a tenant's rights are, but it also lets you know what the landlord's rights are. And it's kind of nice to know the equal balance. There's always two sides to everything, and this booklet gives every detail that you would need to know as a tenant.
During the housing bubble, which eventually burst and caused us to talk so much about housing these days, a lot of people were buying homes as an investment. I'm going to buy it, I'm going to redecorate and flip it, or I'm going to buy it and hang on to it for 10 years and sell it as an investment. What's your take on whether your home, your house, is an investment over the long term?
I think everyone has a different input, but my personal input is my home is the place that I want to live in. It's my residence. It's my personal space. And I can decorate that personal space any way that I want. And I've never looked at home ownership, and I don't promote home ownership as an investment in the future gains of monetary wealth.
Okay.
That's what an investment broker is out there for. But you know, everyone is different. If you're going to be a landlord, then that's a different scenario. But you have to look at all of the costs involved in being a landlord. And can you have a profit after 5 years or 10 years of being a landlord?
And even as a homeowner, you would update, like you said, appliances, furnace breaks. I mean, there are expenses that continue beyond the simple purchase price that may eat into that perceived profit at the end.
And the homeowner also likes to decorate. I mean, if you think about most homeowners, they might not need that new flooring, but they're tired of that flooring. They've had it for 10 years. It's still probably in good shape, and they'll put new flooring down, be it carpet or be it linoleum, or change to wood floors. All of those things are kind of personal taste and making it a more livable situation for them.
And things you can do in a home that you can't necessarily do.
Right. As a tenant, the landlord might not even let you paint. You walk in and it's the cream-colored walls. You have X amount of places where you can put pictures up. The floor is going to stay the same. You might not have that garage that you'd really like to have, especially with the winter months coming. So, you know, tenants have a different perspective, or the renters have a different perspective than the homeowner does.
Okay. Give us a profile of an individual or a family that is in the best position to be looking at home ownership. What's that profile look like?
The profile is that I have a steady job. Your employment base is good. You know your budget. You know exactly how much you're spending on your groceries. You know how much you spend on your car, the gasoline, your educational expenses for your children, clothing. All of that budget has been kind of put together. When I've been renting, I've been able to save some extra money. If I've been renting for $800 a month and I've put $300 a month away each month into savings, that means I could get a home and I could pay $800 or $900 for my mortgage, and I would still have that $200 to put into my savings account. If I get a mortgage that has a significantly higher payment than my rent, I want to make sure that I can cover that area comfortably. And the only way I know that is if I put money away into a savings account.
Right.
So I think stability is the huge key to it, and financial responsibility and financial budgeting is the most important thing that keeps somebody in their home.
All right, lots to consider when making a decision about whether to rent or to buy. Thanks so much for enlightening us on that.
Thank you for having me.
Homeownership is still part of the American dream for many, and renting is a very viable option for many others, especially those who move frequently for work. As our guests have illustrated, patience, preparation, and a close examination of your personal needs will put you in a solid position to make good decisions, even in the current housing market. I'm your host, Stephanie Passingham. Please join us next time on The Heart of the Matter, where we will continue to explore the issues that matter most to you. For help with making a decision about your next housing option, contact the Minnesota Home Ownership Center at hocmn.org or Iowa Home Ownership Education Project at ihoep.com. For more information on the local organizations discussed in this program, visit these sites.